Vatican and World News.
Today, Thursday, November 29th, is the feast of Saint Saturninus, martyr. And these are today's headlines. Pope Francis meets with rectors and pastoral workers of shrines. A convention in Rome reflects on how the Church can continue to make evangelical use of decommissioned churches. And although Asia Bibi has been acquitted in a Pakistani court, she and her family are still not safe. In the Vatican, I'm Christopher Wells. Pope Francis met this morning with participants in the first International Convention of Rectors and Pastoral Workers of Shrines. The convention took place at the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome with the theme, The Shrine, Open Door for Evangelization. In his address, Pope Francis spoke about the importance of welcoming pilgrims. Sean Patrick Levitt tells us more.
A shrine is a church or other sacred place which is visited by people who come as pilgrims to pray or to seek grace and consolation. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of such locations all over the world. Reflecting on the contemporary importance of shrines, Pope Francis described them as places where people gather to express their faith in simplicity, and according to the various traditions that have been learned since childhood. In this sense, he said, shrines are irreplaceable because they keep popular piety alive. Shrines must always be places of welcome, he said, and pilgrims must always be made to feel at home, like a long-awaited family member who's finally arrived. Many people visit a shrine, said the Pope, because of its works of art, or because it's located in a beautiful natural environment. When these people are welcomed, he said, they become more willing to open their hearts and let them be shaped by grace. Above all, said Pope Francis, the shrine is a place of prayer. Most of our shrines are dedicated to Our Lady, and here she opens her arms to listen to the prayer of each and every one. No one visiting a shrine should feel like a stranger, said Pope Francis, especially when they come weighed down by sin. The shrine is a privileged place to experience mercy that knows no boundaries. When mercy is experienced, he said, it becomes a form of real evangelization because it transforms those who receive it into witnesses of mercy. I'm Sean Patrick Lovett.
Also today, Pope Francis addressed participants at the conference, Doesn't God Dwell Here Anymore? Decommissioning Places of Worship and Integrated Management of Ecclesiastical Cultural Heritage. That conference took place at the Pontifical Gregorian University. The conference was organized by the Pontifical Council for Culture in collaboration with the Pontifical Gregorian University and is set for today and tomorrow. In his message to participants, the Holy Father urged them not to face the closure of churches with anxiety, but to see it as an invitation to adapt. Francesca Merlo has the details.
Addressing participants in the conference, Doesn't God Dwell Here Anymore? Decommissioning Places of Worship and Integrated Management of Ecclesial Cultural Heritage, Pope Francis recalls first of all St. Paul VI, who he says affirmed that to care for documents was equivalent to caring for the worship of Christ. The Pope says that as a pastor, Pope Paul VI was very sensitive to the values of culture. St. John Paul II too, he continues, was particularly attentive to the pastoral relevance of art and of cultural assets, as they testify in various ways to God's presence in human history and the Church's life. Pope Francis goes on to reiterate that he likes to give a more marked social expression to theological aesthetics. He asks that we consider that cultural heritage is part of the sacred liturgy of evangelization and of the exercise of charity, explaining that these things are or were instruments of worship, and that these environments and objects destined for worship are perceived by the faithful as a permanent kind of imprint that does not even end after they have lost that role. Pope Francis urges participants at the conference not to see the observation that many churches, which until a few years ago were necessary, no longer are, with anxiety, but rather as a sign of the times that invites us to reflection and requires us to adapt. He then goes on to quote the apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, saying, "Giving priority to time means being concerned about initiating processes rather than possessing spaces." Each church being built, the Pope concludes, should be treated only in terms of their technical or economic profile. channeling the witness of the Church who welcomes and values the presence of her Lord in history. I'm Francesca Merlo.
Day one of that conference is dedicated to a serious and urgent matter of the decommissioning of churches and the new uses to which they'll be put. The second day, attention will focus on management and promotion of the ecclesiastical cultural heritage as a diocesan pastoral activity. Bishop Paul Tighe is Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Culture. He tells us a little bit more.
The conference is looking at a situation, especially in Europe, but also in North America, where there are many church buildings that are no longer meeting the needs, the direct needs of communities. And that's the first thing to say is every part of the world, the situation is different. In some places is that churches were built in inner cities that are no longer populated. Some church places is that the level of practice, that the people are no longer going to church in the numbers went in the past. And it's sufficiently present, albeit different, in different countries, that it does require a kind of a coming together of people to talk about it, and what are the general principles and then what are the things we have to apply locally. So really what this is about is bringing the people from the different countries who have engaged with this issue, offering them a chance to share their ideas on best practice, trying to articulate gradually some general principles that could apply across the situation, and trying to reimagine future uses of churches, trying to think of uses of churches that maybe make a church that's too large for contemporary use, using part of it for religious functions, using other parts of it for other sorts of community purposes. But also one of the things that I think is guiding this is trying to think that the churches which were built for religious purposes were also built to facilitate the community. So if you're thinking of future uses of churches, not just to think about commercial uses, but look at the kind of uses that are maybe compatible with that desire to be of service to community. So cultural uses, museums, art galleries, theatres, that are kind of uses that still allow the community to have a benefit from this.
That was Bishop Paul Tighe, Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Culture. Asia Bibi of Pakistan, who despite her acquittal by the country's Supreme Court on October 31st has not yet embraced her daughters, is deeply worried about the safety of her children. Joseph Nadim has been taking care of her family since Asia was convicted of blasphemy against Islam and sentenced to death by a Pakistani court in 2010. Nadim spoke with Aid to the Church in Need about the family's ordeal. Robin Gomes has that story.
Joseph Nadim expressed fear about the developments in Pakistan since the acquittal of Asia Bibi. In recent days, the Islamists have fired at the gate of our home, he told Aid to the Church in Need, ACN. We are constantly receiving threats, and on more than one occasion, we were being followed. Today, Nadim's family, that is sheltering Asia Bibi's children, Aisha and Aisham, is also in danger. As soon as Asia Bibi was acquitted, we had to flee, Nadim said, adding that the wife and husband are in a safe place, protected by the government, but their daughters are with him. He said each time the Islamists track them down, they run away elsewhere. Since the acquittal, Nadim's family and Asia Bibi's 2 daughters have had to change houses 4 times. We can't even go out to buy food. I only go out at night with my face covered, Nadim told ACN. He said he met Asia Bibi only once, soon after her release, but they talk on the phone every day. He said Asia is aware of the difficult situation and is very worried about her daughters. Aisha and Aisham have not yet embraced their mother, Nadim said, but they are able to regain a bit of their family life on the phone. He recalled the first phone call the 2 daughters had with their mother. The 2 sisters cried for hours for joy. Asia Bibi is looking forward to meeting them and hopes to leave the country soon with her family. Nadim has been helping Asia Bibi and her husband with lawyers and accompanying Ashik and Aisham on their travels abroad, giving testimony of their suffering and raising support for Asia Bibi. I am Robin Gomes.
Elsewhere, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has urged the NATO military alliance to send ships to the Sea of Azov after Russian forces fired upon and seized Ukrainian naval vessels earlier this week. Stefan Boss has the latest.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has warned that there is no military solution after Ukraine's leader urged NATO to send ships to the Sea of Azov. Petro Poroshenko's request follows a naval confrontation with Russia in waters off Crimea, which was annexed by Russia from Ukraine. During Sunday's incident, Russia opened fire on 3 Ukrainian ships and seized their 24 crew members in the Kerch Strait. Merkel said the crisis was, in her words, entirely the doing of the Russian president. However, her words made clear that NATO would not send ships to the region, as Ukraine is not a NATO member. We know that we can only solve these issues through reasonable dialogue, Merkel says. She adds there is no military solution to all these conflicts. Merkel also made clear that she would discuss the issue with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has been boosting the Russian military and weapons in the area. President Poroshenko has implemented martial law across Ukraine's border regions for 30 days in response to the crisis. Martial law will include a partial mobilization and strengthening of the country's air defense systems. For Vatican News, I am Stefan Bos, reporting.
Finally, in his homily at this morning's Mass at the Casa Santa Marta, Pope Francis reflected on the end of the world as the liturgical year draws to a close. The Holy Father said so-called Christian societies that are in fact pagan will end because Christian life cannot be reconciled with a worldly mentality. Devin Watkins tells us more.
Pope Francis turned his thoughts at Mass on Thursday to the end of the world. He took his cue from the readings of the day from the book of Revelations, which describes the destruction of Babylon, a symbol of worldliness, and from the Gospel of Luke, in which Jesus tells of the devastation of Jerusalem, the holy city. On the day of judgment, he said, Babylon will be destroyed with a mighty cry of victory. Pope Francis said that corruption will be revealed under her magnificent beauty, and that her feast will be exposed as false happiness.
Una città illuminata, ma senza luce, non luminosa.
The city may be illuminated, he said, but she will be without light. Hers is a corrupt society. Pope Francis then turned to the fate of Jerusalem. She will see her ruin, he said, in a type of corruption that comes from unfaithfulness to love. He said she was not able to recognize the love of God in his Son. The holy city will be trampled underfoot by pagans, he said, and punished by the Lord, because she opened the doors of her heart to pagans.
La fine di una civiltà contraddittoria in se stessa, che dice di essere cristiana e vive come pagana.
A contradictory society that professes Christianity but lives like a pagan shall end, he said. Finally, Pope Francis invited us to think about the Babylonians of our time and about the many powerful empires of the last century which have fallen. The great cities of today will also end, he said, and so will our lives if we continue along this road towards paganism. The Pope said the only ones who remain are those who place their hope in the Lord. I'm Devin Watkins.
And that brings us just about to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. For more on these and other stories, be sure to visit our new web portal at www.vaticannews.va. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Many thanks go to our sound engineers and producers in studio. In the Vatican, I'm Christopher Wells.